Okay, so in respect to some of the new RFI, or Request for Information standards, there's a lot of them. Some of them are customized, and then my experience is some of them seem to be form letters. You get the same letter right across Canada, and it's tweaked a little bit, but the content is very similar. So they tend to fall into two categories. One, request for technical information, which really focuses on evidence of experiments, and more so than ever, what we call the due diligence. What due diligence did you do to define prior art or define standard practice? Questions that you usually weren't getting as much in the past. Then the second main area of questions is financial, and specifically asking for very detailed timesheet information. And timesheet information has always been a factor, but it seems to be a little bit more of a focus now. So we'll talk about those changes. So the first typical one is a typical request would be, please send a maximum of 5 letter-sized pages for each project that best demonstrate the work meets SR&ED. So that's pretty easy, 5 pages. They're saying that if you have some kind of technical documentation. You think, well, that's very reasonable, 5 pages. That's not going to take us that long. But then they add this caveat that says, oh, and in addition to that, if not covered in the 5 pages before, also show us information that showed your initial due diligence to define the technology problem as well as available technology and where it fell short. So they're really asking you, what did you do? Not, hey, we had a problem and trying to do the engineering method where you started and we got a product that the client was happy with. They're saying, no. If you didn't do the due diligence at the start, before you started the project, you made our job really easy because we're just going to say it's within standard practice. All right? And then lastly here, they say, show us evidence that you preserve the new technical knowledge within the company, which is basically show us what conclusions you made, that you've recognized those conclusions, and that you couldn't have you couldn't have made that conclusion at the start of the work. So fair enough, but I'm saying more and more you're seeing consistent questionnaires for this. So the question then becomes, they tell you they want this, but they don't tell you how to do it. So we want evidence of due diligence. Do whatever you want to do. So the question, from a claimant standpoint is, all right, how do we record? How do we prove we did enough due diligence or we defined prior art adequately before we started? And this little template here is something that we use to say, well, here's basically all the different things we think you could do. The first 3 are really internet searches. You can do internet searches. You find articles, or maybe you search Google patents. We'll give a quick demo of how easy that is and what a powerful tool that can be for claimants, and they can use it relatively free. But also, did you look at competitive methods, how someone did it, and then realize, hey, our competitor's got a product that's competitive with ours, but they won't tell us how they do it. It's secret. It's closed source, whatever. I might have to reverse engineer something. A lot of clients do all this in their head, but I find that they don't document it. And it's really the formalization of this process as early as possible in the project evolution to get the client doing this due diligence work really up front now if they're going to qualify for the SR&ED. And it's becoming more and more intrinsic that you don't just jump into a problem now before you do your due diligence if you're going to claim the SR&ED. Okay. So to put this in perspective, what we'd say is for a typical project, this is something I call the key criteria summary. I have a project where one of the old CRA machinery projects where I'm trying to improve compounding equipment. So what kind of things did I do at the start? Did I do internet searches, patent searches, competitive products, things like that? This would be an exemplary example if we did all this stuff. This would be a very strong project. I'm not saying you have to do that, but if that area is blank, I would say you want to be concerned on ongoing claims. If you didn't do any due diligence, it's going to be a tough sell in the future, and not only to the CRA, but probably to the tax courts as well. I like to show quantifiable objectives, and we talked about in our tax court cases, the case that we were in before, that the courts continually talk about systematic investigation involving extremely accurate measurement and analysis of those measurements. They say without such measurement analysis, systematic investigation can't exist. So if you're not measuring something and analyzing those measurements, it's going to be hard to claim. Again, why software falls into so many issues, and certain industries have a harder problem. They're not as tolerance-driven as other industries, which have a relatively easy time of doing this. The next thing is, once we've defined our standard practice and objectives that go beyond the box or outside the box, I would propose that the courts are saying they want to see how the scientist has ranked the variables or the things under his or her control that he or she could experiment with or the team could experiment with in order to achieve the objectives. So there may be an infinite number of things we can do to achieve the objectives, but there's probably 5 or 6 that are more likely to succeed than others. So the trick here is really showing that the existing models for those variables aren't deterministic, that I can't pull the model and say, in my situation, I'll follow this model and it's going to work. And not just a little bit of fine-tuning of 1 or 2 variables, but that changing one variable could have unpredictable upstream or downstream effects on other variables, i.e. our system uncertainty, that we can't predict. And I think that clients that can be specific about what those variables are and that there is no standard practice solution then create a great scope for the rest of the activities. Activities that are necessary to resolve those stated variables are in. Activities that don't seem to resolve those stated variables or the understanding are the commercial side of things. So it provides an objective framework for the courts. And the courts have basically said with their 5-step process, which is more or less is that it's not up to us and practitioners or claimants or the RTAs, they say, to decide whether something's SR&ED. They say deciding whether something's SR&ED is a question of law to be decided by a tax court judge. And our role is to act, quote, as a set of prescription glasses to provide the judge with this information so that he or she can make an informed decision on whether something appears to be within standard practice or not. And what this means, so that's the theoretical side of things. What it means practically is I see a lot of objections that could be going to court in the near future. And the CRA has said, well, we think this is routine or standard practice. But that's it. They haven't provided any evidence of where they've seen their routine or standard practice or where those routines would be available. And to take it a step further, the legislation for R&D tax credits is the same pretty much all around the world. We all use an international definition from the OECD about R&D or SR&ED or whatever you want to call it. So what should be SR&ED in the United States or United Kingdom should pretty much be SR&ED here or Australia. We have exactly word for word the same legal definition in our act, and we speak the same languages. So technically, the law should be the same. What's eligible should be eligible anywhere. In the United States, they have something called a rebuttal presumption, that if an IRS auditor wants to deny an R&D tax credit claim in the United States because they think it's within standard practice, they have to provide evidence, like a scientist, of where that method was. Here's the method. Here's if you followed it, how it would have met your criteria. Now, when I talk to Russ Roberts and other fellows from Ottawa and say, how come we have the same law, but in the IRS they interpret it completely different? His answer was that technically that's the way it's supposed to work here. That's a theory of how it's supposed to work in Canada, but it's just not operating that way. So I think the system's broken and it just needs to be fixed, but we have a model on how to do it. So a scientific opinion, really at the end of the day, I believe, should be supported with scientific evidence, not merely opinions. Not, I think if you would have looked harder, you would have found the evidence. That's just an opinion, as opposed to, here's 3 models that, for specific reasons, I think would have solved your solution. Well, that's using science. That's fair enough. Now you're comparing a scientist to a scientist, and now you're allowing the judge to make an informed decision. Why do you think this model would work? What shortcomings of this model can you prove wouldn't make it work? And based on those answers, it wouldn't matter what field of science, he or she, the judge, should be able to make an informed and correct decision in each case. All right, so very quickly, what I'll do is I'll show you some slides here, and then if we have time at the end, I'll show you how to do this live because it's even faster, is how do you do a due diligence search or a prior art search or whatever? So one of the things I'm saying is, well, what terms do I search for in the first place? That's usually the hardest part. Do I go for the project name, improving compounding equipment? Do I go for the objectives? Do I look at the variables that I'm looking at? Do I look at a combination of those? And the answer is, all of those are correct. The real trick is to get started. Okay? Once you get started, you can use something called Google Patents, and it's free. You just go to Google Patents, and it'll pop up, and it's going to search every US patent for free. You can download it. You can view it. I'll do it live quick here at the end, but I just got to switch out of my program, so I'll show you some screenshots. So for instance, I go to Google Patents, and I type in improved commenting equipment for objective by whatever variables I want. And it'll say, well, here's 50,000 patents in half a second. Try to find something that's close to what you're doing or close to the issues. I'm saying once you get close, it's really easy to start to hone in. Google's really thought that made this very, very simple for the researcher to use. And what's exciting is that not only does it help to find prior art, which we need for SR&DD credits, often it's going to show the researcher ideas, or hey, wow, look at, I never even thought of that. It may generate new ideas that they hadn't even thought of for their experimentation, which is just a bonus. Now we're helping, not only for patents, we're helping the client do better research, getting answers or ideas that he or she wouldn't have had. So once we find a patent or something that we think is reasonably close to the issues that we're looking at, we can do a number of things. We can look at all the citations. So we're saying this is cited by 11 other patents, which probably have something very close to do to that. So we can scroll down to the patents and we can look at all other 11 sightings. And often they cite other patents that are similar and so forth. So that's the first case. So you can very quickly narrow in on what are the closest things. Once you find one that's close, you're going to start to find all the ones that are close. So you'll be able to say, here's other patents. Let's go through and look if any of them are issues that I'm related to, or companies that might do something different, or anything that I want. And let's see how old it is. Drill in there. So you can keep references to a couple of these. Yes, Ed?
Would you print all these pages out and make a nice thick file and go to as evidence?
Well, I'm going to show you what I would recommend you do, but you can do, there's no right or wrong on this. What I'll illustrate is, the only problem with Google Patents like this is that within an hour, you're going to be overloaded. You're going to have 300 patents, and you're going to start, literally, if you don't have a way to organize this, it's overwhelming. It'll literally just bury you. But it may bury you in good ideas. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the hardest thing about dealing with Google is not that there's not good information. There's so much good information that it can almost just paralyze you. And where do I go now? How do I organize 300 patents that are all somehow relevant? You can create that paralysis. So I'm saying, well, for shred purpose, I'll talk about just what to do for shred. I mean, for development, that's your own issue. You've got to handle that yourself. But one of the things that, if I go back up, one of the things that Google does that's really cool is, in addition to the sightings at the bottom that I showed you, they have a button called Find Prior Art. And when you click that button, it says, here's the top 10, and you can click that, top 10 scholarly articles using that word combination. Okay? Here's the top 10 patents using this combination. Here's the top 10 web hits, as if you just went in Google on your own that would have showed up. Top 10 books and top 10 people writing about those articles. But I could also say, you know what? You're right, these are all important issues, but now it recommends, it says, you know what, when those issues pop up, often these are related issues. Are any of these relevant? You may, hey, you know what, that's good, I'm going to tweak one of those. Or I can add my own search terms. So I can, again, very quickly start to look at ones and create other ideas that narrow in on exactly what I'm doing. So I'm saying very, very quickly, like within an hour, you can generate a pretty good list of evidence of standard practice. A list of evidence that I'm saying, if I'm going to tax court with 50 items of standard practice on why they fall short, and the CRA reviewers coming in with nothing other than an opinion that you should have looked harder, well, I have 50 pieces of evidence versus no pieces of evidence. I think I'm going to win. That's what I think. I don't know, the judges will decide, but I think if I have 50 articles proving that I can't do it, and CRA doesn't have any articles, doesn't have any evidence, then their opinion is just that. It's an opinion. There's no fact behind it. So everything in court is going to be factually driven. It's driven by evidence. This is ultimately the evidence that you need at the outset. If you do this, it might help you file patents or commercialability or stuff like that. So there's also add-ons, but really, you've got a good basis. And I'm saying this is something that you can do quickly. You're not spending hours or tens of hours. You can do this in half an hour. And actually, if you get it going with clients, it can be fun. They'll start to, oh, hey, this is a good idea. People that are really into their science are going to enjoy doing this. And you won't even have to help them. They'll start going off on their own and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But one of the other things that it does here is it says, if I want of that top 10 list, I can hit export, and it'll export the top 10 of all of those right there in a single spreadsheet. So I've got 50 items that are the top 10 matches of each of those categories based on the word combination that I have. And I'm not saying that's going to be exhaustive or prove anything, but I'm saying when I go to court, all I have to do is show I put a reasonable search. I mean, there's no definition of reasonable. What may be reasonable to you may not be reasonable to you, and vice versa. But I'm saying the more you have and the more relevant, the more reasonable it's probably going to be. 500 items is probably better than 50. What's reasonable? I can't comment on that other than to say the larger the project, the more due diligence you should probably do. You know? On a $10 million project, maybe 500 is the right number. On a $10,000 project, maybe 5 is the right number. I don't know. You'd have to look at each project on its own. Okay, any other issues on that? So again, Google Patents is a quick tool. I'll illustrate again how quick it is to use. I can actually illustrate that goal within probably half the time that I illustrate the slides. Take care, guys. Good to see you, Garen. Okay, the second major area, and then how to deal with that as well. CRA requests for salary or wages. So here's typically what they're asking. It's not just give us your salary and wages, or a chart with job descriptions. Fair enough. Nothing wrong with it, but makes sense why they'd ask that. Details of activities for each shred project claim, including number of hours claimed for each individual per activity per month. So this is something that people are, what do you mean like month, and how do I break that down? This is good for the guys who actually do it the way the CRA says, that every month or every quarter you should go and compare your project descriptions and allocate your time. It doesn't work as well for the guys who do it 6 to 12 months after the year end and then go back and kind of retroactively build it, which seems to be a large number of claimants. So these kinds of requests are causing some people no problems at all. Look, here you go, right off our timesheet system. And other people, it's a huge mountain of hassle. So again, I think a lot of it is just really, if you understand the system, what the CRA is saying is try to document your SR&D as much in real time as you can. Don't leave all the thought or documentation. Even if you have a rough system in to identify what are the key problems. Let's allocate activities versus those problems, and we can write it up at the end of the year. But at least let's agree what are the benchmarks or variables that we're going to consider SR&D related, and what are the variables that should be within routine or standard practice. And just having the teams understand that at a high level or have some consensus usually makes it easy for anyone to say, you know what, I think I did something that helped the team understand one or more of these variables. That's why it's SR&D. So again, the success usually seems to be agreeing on the variables with the development team and communicating those variables real time to the people so that when they're doing the work, they're not thinking after what were my problems. They're saying, here's the 5 problems or 3 problems or whatever we've identified, and here's how my work relates to one of them. And if I can make that link, you probably got an easy claim. Now, this is just my opinion from looking at different clients on what's worked and what hasn't worked with the timesheets. I always find the timesheet issue one of the funniest ones because CRA has been saying this for 20 years. They're saying, oh, you got to do time, and this comes, and then it goes away, and then it comes again. And sometimes it's a hot issue, and it's hot right now, and it'll go away for another 2 or 3 years, and you'll never hear about it again. But the biggest joke is that they haven't published what's an acceptable timesheet. They say, you have to have them. I had one client who had the most meticulously documented time. I mean, every day they were talking about projects and what they did in extreme amount of detail. And a reviewer came in and said, that's not acceptable. And he said, what do you mean? I developed this with the previous reviewer. He agreed. He helped me develop this. Like, he put his stamp of approval. And he said, oh, okay, it's acceptable. And I mean, it's literally that hilarious that there's no rhyme or reason. Nobody knows what they're looking for in timesheets. There's no pronouncements. It just says you have to keep them. And then whatever you provide, they say, oh, that's not good. That's not what we meant. Okay. So here's what they normally get. They get the first name, last name, hours worked, and a project code. Maybe a brief note. Okay, so I'm saying that at least that's a good start. If you got that, you could probably stay alive because there's nothing that says you have to do anything more. Here's an example of an acceptable timesheet. The part that in red is usually the parts that are missing. In every time system that I see, not everyone, but 99% are missing one or more component. So it's good to have the work, but really there's only 4 types of work that are going to be eligible. When you can list the Act lists 8 types of supporting activities, but really you can group them into design or testing. Okay? Everything in the Act, the listing supporting activities, is either really design or testing, or computer programming, arguably. Okay? And the next level is what they call the first level of direct supervision. Okay? So if I'm not doing one of those 4 activities at a very high level, it might be part of the business project. It's not SR&ED. Just to really simplify it. Ideally, to take it to so this is really the next kind of thing that we need. And if we have that, we're probably okay. They'll accept that decision. If you can take it that the teams agreed what are the variables that they don't understand the relations on and they're going to be researching, and they've dealt with one of those, that's going to be the icing on the cake. That will put you over the top. Then your timesheet should never be challenged by CRA. Okay, especially if it's got some optional comments about how it related to the SR&ED. So timesheets that contemplate you're doing SR&ED and talk about SR&ED issues in the timesheet itself are great. That's the ultimate timesheet. CRA doesn't say you have to do it, but any clients who actually do that are usually very successful. Other than that, one client I've talked about who got all the claim anyways, but it just was a bit of a fight. Okay? The other thing that's missing is where did you do the work? A lot of people put timesheet, 12 hours on this job, project X, 16 hours. And then when we come to review, the financial reviewer has all these adjustments because they say, well, weren't you in Italy for 4 weeks here? Oh, did you pull a foreign time out? So, oh, yeah, geez, let's go do that. Oop, adjustments, me bad. And even more so, they're saying, hey, weren't you in Alberta for 4 weeks? You don't get any Ontario credit now. Like, they're really being... They've always been detailed about the country, but now it's at a provincial level. Whoa, if you're in Alberta for 2 months, you don't get the OITC for that 2 months of work. So again, most time systems are missing one of these red components. Not all of them, but most of them are missing one or more of these, and that's where all the problems are starting. Okay? And the claimants, in my view, innocent because you didn't tell them what to do. You just said, keep it, that's all they said, keep a timesheet. You got to keep timesheet with project codes. That's about all the direction the CRA is giving. And I think that they should, if they're really going to start to demand this, they got to tell you more specifically, here's the other things that we recommend so that you can take your hours times your hourly rate and give me a shred number, not a project number, not the business project, the SR&ED project. Okay? So most clients can do the calculation of the hours times the rate. That's not the problem for them. It's really the parts in the middle. And again, there's a lot of emphasis on timesheets now, but I don't think they've clearly described that these are the things that they're looking for, primarily. And you get that more from talking to enough reviewers on what they didn't like and what they'd like to see in there to piece this together. But I think it just needs to be formalized a bit before they start enforcing those kinds of requirements. Okay, so